You know, when you help coordinate a TEDx event in a prison, it's an incredibly significant personal sacrifice. When you're selected to participate in a 3-month professional development program at the Rotary Peace Center in Thailand, that's an incredible opportunity. When you develop a nonprofit organization that is hoping to heal society's cycle of violence and incarceration, that's admirable and authentic. And when you give up a career with as an international leader in a world-renowned company to do these things, it illustrates unbelievable personal dedication. Well, our speaker today has done all of this. She's produced a TEDx event at the Donovan Correctional in San Diego. She's participated in a special Rotary program at the Rotary Peace Center in Thailand. And she has started an organization called Brilliance Inside. Mariette Formeau left a career as a high-level international leader of Hewlett-Packard to dedicate herself to help the residents of the prison in San Diego. Then she was selected to participate in the Rotary Peace Fellow Program, and she spent time in Thailand. And I celebrated with her when she went with that program, and I asked her if she would share some of the comments about that program. So Mariette's going to be sharing about Rotary International's efforts to promote peace. She'll talk a little bit about what it's like to work with the residents of the correctional facility. And I hope she will inspire you. No, I know she will inspire you with her focus on helping us discover the brilliance we have inside. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely proud and pleased to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Mariette Formeau.
Thank you so much, Randy. Okay, wait, I'm going to stop the spotlight because I want to see all of you. There. Thank you. I am so moved by the introduction. I am so grateful for your loyal friendship and for being able to pop on the phone and have a conversation or brainstorm about just about anything. So thank you for those many opportunities and for the ones to come. And I actually want to take a moment and thank each and every single one of you here, the ones I can see and the ones that I can't. Because the fact of the matter is, by virtue of being Rotarians, you contributed to the greatest insight I received this year to date that really shaped my understanding of the work that I do, because it took place at my Rotary Peace Fellowship. I was privileged to be one of 22 Peace Fellows selected out of 1,500 applicants to participate in the class 28 of the Rotary Peace Fellowship that takes place in Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, Thailand. It's a 3-month intensive program in the study of conflict resolution and peace building. And I applied and chose to participate because I thought that understanding the theory of peace building could help me understand what were the underlying reasons and ways that we created this wild success that we had created in prison. People ask me regularly, how did you do it? And I wasn't fully confident in my answer. And so I want to walk you through and journey with you in this insight that I received. And it took place on the very first week of the Peace Fellowship in early January of this year. It didn't take long for me to start getting whacked in the face with insights. And it was, we dove almost immediately into the content. And so by the Friday of that first week, we were having a conversation about gender equality. And our instructor and all the instructors in this program seemed to come from the top of their game in the field that they were teaching us in. It was awesome. This instructor teaching us about gender equality talks about all of the gender stereotypes that we have in our society. Things like men are tough and don't cry, and women are sensitive and nurturing. And she kept rehashing, these gender stereotypes. And that created the disconnect for me. And so at one point I raised my hand and I said, if these are the things that we want to move away from, that we no longer want to see in our society, why are we spending so much time and energy focused on them? And she looked at me and she said, well, so we can understand the disease. And I said, okay, why do we want to do that? Well, so we can devise a treatment for it. And I'll tell you that most likely is an answer that seems very logical and rational and obvious to most, if not all of you. That answer blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. And so let me walk you through how my past 5 years of work have crystallized for me in that instant. And so for me, that understanding starts with the recognition that I do believe that the vast majority of our world functions under the same premise that that instructor functions under. I see a problem, I understand the problem, I fix the problem. Most of our life, have it be in ourselves, in our homes, in our work, in our schools, in our governments, wherever, is looking to alleviate pain and suffering. And so that means that, for example, when your business sales are down, you're going to ask your sales team to do an analysis of what might have jeopardized the sales of the last quarter. You know, researchers look to understand the underpinnings of cancer so they can find a treatment for it. And when it comes to prison, well, most of us are looking at understanding the violence that exists in that system, so we can take the efforts to alleviate and reduce the violence that exists. It turns out that this approach, peace study researchers have a name for it. You know, the approach that focuses on the problem to fix the problem leads to an outcome they call negative peace. Negative peace is the absence of violence or fear of violence, or absence of the problem or fear of the problem. And so that's already a great outcome, to have the absence of violence, the absence of the problem. But is that really peace? You know, in prison, when prison residents, like when there's violence in the prison system, like prison residents are put on lockdown, each back in their cells for 23.5 hours a day. But does that really get to the core of the causes of that violence? And does that create peace? Yeah. And it turns out that the peace researchers had also identified that beyond negative peace, which, let's be clear, is a already good outcome, there's a field they call positive peace. And they define positive peace as the attitudes and the structures and the institutions that create and sustain a peaceful society. This type of society includes things like equality, equity, justice, health, well-being, respect and dignity and love. You know, a positive peace environment is one that creates the conditions that eliminates the causes of violence. And it turns out that in my work in prison, I had, unbeknownst to me, created a positive peace approach. And so, like I do with everyone that I meet, I'm going to take you into prison. And if you walk in with me on my first day, when I went to maximum security prison, which is here by the border in San Diego, it was in December of 2015, and one of the first men I met there told me his life story in about 15 minutes. It included his exceedingly abusive childhood, as well as the fact that he had murdered 7 people and attempted murder on 2 others. So I really quickly learned that prison is indeed a dark, violent, dehumanized and dehumanizing environment. I also learned that race is, bar none, the greatest divide in prison. Simply acknowledging someone of another race on the prison yard can get someone seriously hurt or even killed. And so here I was in an environment where the violence was endemic, impossible for me or for us to go inside and not be present to it. And I had a lot of compassion for it, a lot of empathy for it. But never once did I think that I would play a role to fix those problems. It turned out my approach was different. When we got approved to organize a TEDx event inside Donovan Prison, we recruited and selected what we call core team of 10 prison residents This core team were going to be the people that were going to organize the event. Okay? They literally made every decision about this event, even down to what we were eating, even though they have no access to buying that food. And my intent as we were doing this was that as we work together, as we meet weekly, we define and create the space that we wanted to engage with, we wanted to live in. The space that was going to allow us to be who we wanted to be, who those guys were not allowed to be out on the prison yard. And so as we move through this, process, we, instead of focusing on the violences that we didn't want to have in our space, we focused on the attitudes and the behaviors that we did want in the space. We wanted to be true collaborators, not just by words, but by our actions, where our listening was constantly and continuously that deep, authentic, non-judgmental listening. And that we do what we so often aspire to do, which is build off of each other's ideas in a deeply collaborative fashion. We wanted a space that would be fully restorative to each of us, regardless of our stories, and to hold all of our stories. We wanted a space where each and every single one of us felt safe and had permission to uncover, do the hard work of uncovering and igniting and then becoming our brilliance. Our brilliance, that's the term that we use, not for what we're brilliant at, but for our essence, our spirit, our light, those God-given gifts that I truly believe is given to each and every single one of us, no matter our circumstances, and that are ours to give to the world. And this was a moment by moment work, literally moment by moment, where everyone had the ownership and the responsibility to ensure that every thought, word, and action aligned with our intents. And so could we also compassionately and with a lot of love and support, work through the times that we weren't behaving and speaking or thinking in the way that aligned with that? Now, some people are like, okay, great, so what? Why spend so much effort focused on the space in which we engage with or engage in? Well, I'll tell you, I was completely naive and ignorant about it too. I had no idea, what the intent or purpose of this was. But its transformational power showed up 5 months and 1 day after we started organizing the event when we held our first TEDx event. It was in May 21st of 2017. And 100 people came in from the outside, people like you and me. And they spent the day with 100 people from the inside. The morning was spent listening to TEDx talks, like the ones that you've experienced at Randy's events. And the afternoon was spent in these multiple, small, intimate conversations between 4 people pods. I'll tell you, I remember the humanity that was felt in the room that day. I remember these countless shifts in perceptions that were happening across these hundreds of conversations between disconnected worlds. And I remember the tears of joy streaming down some of the administrators' faces at the end of the day, bewildered by what they were experiencing. I'm going to assume that a few of you are marketeers and know what the Net Promoter Score is. And for those of you that do, well, when TED surveyed our outside attendees, they gave our event a Net Promoter Score, or an NPS, of an absolutely unprecedented 100. That was 100 for an event that was organized by a group of people that we often consider to be no good societal throwaways, inhumane, even monsters. And this unbelievable wild success was possible because we focused on an approach that was based on our desire for positive peace, not negative peace. We were looking to become our brilliance, our positive attributes, both individually and collectively, instead of focusing on fixing the problem. And so in prison, that looks like a space where we got to learn how to live with each other Many of you guys mentioned that when you talked about what you would do for world peace. We learn to live with each other instead of simply locking them up when violence erupts. Now, let's come back into the fellowship classroom. All that just described to you is what crystallized for me in that instant, in that exchange with that instructor. That instructor had leveraged a negative peace approach of focusing on the problem of gender inequality. And when I stepped into prison, I went completely countercurrent, because it's very countercurrent for that environment, and had the radical approach of never even thinking about the problem. I was singularly focused on who did we want to become, and what was the space that was going to enable us to become who we wanted to be and who we had always been meant to be. And then empowering every person in that circle, no matter who they were and no matter what their story was, to take responsibility for their own emotional well-being and way it showed up, as well as holding space when others weren't showing up in that environment, or in that way, excuse me. Now, I'll quickly say that there is still some people that think that when we don't focus on the problem, it won't reduce. And I will basically guarantee now that that exact opposite is true. Because remember, since positive peace environments create the conditions that eliminate the causes of violence, violence just naturally decreases. And not only that, there was a shift on the prison yard that none of us could have expected. So I told you back at the beginning that race is the greatest divide in prison. Our guys couldn't meet on the yard or couldn't meet outside of our weekly meeting times to plan the event because of the racial tensions. They even have what they call a call sign on the yard because they couldn't acknowledge each other. And a year later, in December of 2016, when we had already started organizing our second event, our guys were telling us, I get goosebumps, that they were meeting on the yard. They were not only meeting on the yard, our multiracial group of tough guys were hugging on the yard. Now, maybe some of you can't fathom the absolute counterculture that is, but here was a culture that had been defined and inculcated by 10 core team members and had permeated a yard of 750 prison residents, a yard that had active gangs and race groups. And so I went back to, I spent the rest of my fellowship understanding these dynamics, understanding the intricacies of what worked and how it worked. And I came away with a deep refinement of what I call the ingredients that make our space so powerful and so transformative. And I'll tell you today, I am more committed than ever to not only bring this kind of leadership approach to more prisons, but also to every single place human beings interact. And for me, that starts with business. First, because I've been in business my whole life from childhood, but more importantly, because I truly believe business is one of the most powerful forces to create the change we wish to see in the world. And so to close, I have one question for you. Where have you been keeping your team, your organization, or someone in your environment on lockdown? Because I know there's another approach that might be able to create radical new value and success. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you so much for this opportunity.